That's right.
So, no, Lee Powell and I became friends. Golly, I don't even know how many years ago it was.
Chris, you're fading. I cannot hear what you're saying now, Chris.
I will try to speak distinctly.
Thank you.
Lee and I became friends a number of years ago when Lee was serving as the lead pastor of Cedar Creek Community Church in Toledo, suburban Toledo with multiple campuses sort of surrounding the city. A wonderfully, a church that is incredibly dedicated to doing some good in the city. And the Lord just prospered this church and it grew like crazy. I won't tell Lee's story for him, but a few years ago, Lee transitioned from his role as the lead pastor at Cedar Creek and has begun coaching and encouraging pastors around the country in a variety of areas. But one of the things that I really appreciate about Lee is that in all of the years in his leadership in ministry, he's never shied away, I don't think, he's never shied away from leaning in on this topic of generosity and stewardship. But Lee, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I don't think it's necessarily been your favorite thing to do.
No, it's not.
Yeah. So I'm going to turn it over to you, bro. Let you talk about what you tell us a little bit about what you're doing now and kind of the work that you're doing, and then I'll let you. Lee's going to share for a few minutes, and then I'm going to interview him back and forth. We'll ask a few questions, and then we'll let you all do the same. How's that sound? Okay. All right, Lee. Thanks so much. Why don't you welcome?
Where do you want me to start from, Chris? Chris, do you want me to start from what I'm doing now? You said, or
Sure. Just give us a little bit of an update on what you're doing now. I think that'd be great.
Yeah. Well, so 2 years ago when I left Cedar Creek, and I left because I was diagnosed with Parkinson's in March of 2014, and one of the things that exacerbates Parkinson's is stress. And so leading a church of 8,000 people with 5 locations has some amount of stress to it. And so when I decided to move to Texas, because my children, adult children, had, for the most part, all planted there for different reasons. It was a God thing. And I knew Leadership Network's headquarters was in Texas. And so I went to Dave Travis and said, hey, Dave, I'm here to serve. What can I do? I'd like to give my time for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, whatever. And he said, well, we have this thing called Fans, Friends, and Family. Now it's called Engage, where we invite churches to be a financial partner with Leadership Network. And I said, Dave, is this like a capital campaign, like a fundraiser kind of thing? He said, well, it's sort of that. Yeah, we're raising money for the ministry of Leadership Network to continue the work. Well, when I left the ministry, I thought to myself, or at least the pastoral ministry, I thought, I'm never going to have to do another capital campaign. So here I am offering myself up. And what does Dave ask me to do? He asked me to lead now we call it Engage, where we invite partner churches in to be a part of Leadership Network's ministry. And so it's just, I thought it was God's sense of humor. And what I discovered really in ministry is that we're always, all of us, in a perpetual campaign of some sort or another. One of the things, that the tags that I got at Cedar Creek was that I was not, or the tag I got, that people would say, Lee doesn't like doing a giving talk, or Lee doesn't like talking about money. And yet, when I left Cedar Creek, there were 5 locations, about $35 million in assets and buildings, but more important than that, 7,000 baptisms and all kinds of stories of changed lives, which is, it's not about bricks and mortar. But the point is that we did okay, even though I would agree there's this part of me that doesn't particularly like to do giving messages, and not because I'm fearful of, the pushback from the believers. I'm more concerned about running off unbelievers. And so that's, kind of where that's the, when I was talking to Chris about this and said, Chris, it's true that I did not like capital campaigns. I did not like giving talks per se. They weren't my favorite talks, but you absolutely have to learn to do it and be consistent and be engaged. And again, one of the caveats I would leave you with is my discovery is that we're all in a perpetual capital campaign. What do you want to say to that, Chris?
Oh.
And I have 3 things I would like to go ahead.
I don't know that I want to say anything yet, but I do love that idea. I'm sitting back here making notes. You How do you want to do this, bro? Do you want to finish what you want to say? You want to engage as
Yeah, let me give you some.
Just give us your thoughts, and then I'll jump back. And we'll go from there.
Yeah. So here's coming from a guy who, again, it wasn't my favorite thing to do, but I knew that we had to raise the resources if we were going to be successful. And so one of the things I did, and I don't know who I got this from, we steal almost all of our ideas, and that was to have what I called a key donor breakfast, lunch, or dinner. And I would ask my assistant to give me a list of the top 100 givers in the church, top 100 giving units in the church. And then I would take that list and I would mark up for her who I wanted her to call and make an appointment with for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. I mean, however we could work it out. Sometimes the couples would be together. Sometimes we'd just meet with one person if that was appropriate. And then I would also typically invite the campus pastor to that meeting as well. And these meetings, I would try to meet with them twice a year if possible. And these meetings consisted of not asking for money. This is what was key to these. It was really asking them what was going on in their life, and then talking to them, answering any questions they have about the church. And we would have, this happened more than once, where couples would come and show up, and we'd have 4 or 5 couples. And one of the couples would say, I'd ask them a question. I'd say, so you guys know why you're here? And they'd shake their head and, no, we really don't know why we're here. And I said, how many of you thought it was to talk about money? And, some people would say, I thought it was about money. And on one occasion when I did this, the wife ribs the husband because they'd had a bet as to whether or not I was going to talk about money or ask for money. So the reason that we didn't ask for money in those settings or talk about money per se is because didn't need to, didn't want to. And really, I wanted to talk about them, and I wanted to find out what was going on in their heart, hear their story, their spiritual journey. But here's the thing is, then when there is a capital campaign, an official capital campaign, and you sit down across the table from them, it's not the first time you're talking to them. And I was always a little bit funny about talking to somebody for the first time. I met somebody or sat down with somebody, and I'm asking them for a big donation. That gets a little uncomfortable. Whereas if I have an ongoing relationship with them, then it's easy. I mean, I've got some people. One of the things I did not tell Chris even is that I went from attending the largest church in Texas, Gateway, to one of the smallest churches in Texas called The River. It's a church plant, only 85 people now. And I've just recently volunteered to be his executive pastor part-time. And I've talked to him about establishing this discipline of meeting with key donors right now, so that when he goes back to them, and asks them for money, it's not the first time he sat down with them over lunch or dinner. And ironically, we got a notice from the theater that we're meeting in currently that we need to be out by January, which is really a God thing. That's good. We're going to go into an elementary school, but we have to raise $70,000 for the relaunch of the portable church equipment. And the pastor, he's a little nervous about that because this is, his first church he's planted. He's a young guy, but $70,000 is not a lot of money. But here's the thing. I'm calling some people from Cedar Creek who I've had a relationship with, and there's no discomfort at all on their part or my part when I ask them for money at all, because I've got this relationship with them. So this top 50, top 100, and let me back up and just say with Michael, who's pastoring this church, The River, he has, since I've been there since last January, he has started meeting with people, and now it's going to be very easy for him to call them and say, hey, we have this chance to relaunch the church, but we really need people to come on board financially. How much are you willing to put in there to take a chunk out of that $70,000? And so probably that's the best thing that I can leave you with. And when you talk about an ongoing perpetual capital campaign, that is certainly indicative of that when you're meeting with these people on a regular. And so really, I was probably meeting with people. My calendar, I had 1 or 2 meetings a week. And you just do the math. That's what you have to do. Sometimes when I was not teaching, I might even do 3 or 4. So that's one. And then of course the second thing is the strategic series, which I'm sure you guys are adept at this, but just wanted to mention that you do have to do series that are targeted regarding spiritual or stewardship and giving. When I announced to the programming team, the arts team, that we were doing a giving talk, it was just a giving series, just to watch their their response. And one of the things that we talk to our key staff about is we have got to link arms and we have to just stand firm and be glad that we're doing this particular series and not do it begrudgingly. So that's just a little piece of advice. And then the third thing, and Chris, you could attest to this a little bit, and that is that you have to obsess about the vision. And so when you obsess about the vision, it comes out in your talks. It comes out, your talk may be doing a series on relationships or marriage, but somehow you have to get the vision in there, because when the people are overwhelmed by the vision, when the vision is in their veins, and then you ask them for money, it's a much, much easier ask to make because it's connected to the vision. I don't know if, Chris, if you remember coming to Cedar Creek when Generis helped us with a capital campaign.
I remember.
Yeah, and one of the things you guys, you asked us the question, will your people own the vision at Cedar Creek? And I said they're going to own the vision for sure. And I think you guys did find that. But what you also found was they hadn't always connected money to the vision. And so, that was a kind of a bit of a wake up call for us. We needed to do better than we were doing. And so when I talk about obsessing about the vision, you have to also make the connections for them and help them see how it's not just the vision they need, but how is that vision going to be played out? How are you going to fund the vision? And ultimately, capital campaigns, this is what kept me in the game and keeps me in the game today. I mean, when Travis asked me to be a part of Leadership Network and help raise resources for Leadership Network, on the one hand, I was smiling and thought it was kind of funny after saying I'd never have to do another capital campaign. On the other hand, it's not a capital campaign. It's not about bricks and mortar. It's not about an organization. With Leadership Network, it's about people whose lives are being transformed and changed as Leadership Network assists churches, helps them get better and make a greater impact. And when we do that, the kingdom wins. And so in regard to the local church, I just started thinking about capital campaigns in a different way. I didn't think about as, bricks and mortar, more seats, more square footage. I thought about it, and still to this day, when I think of capital campaigns, it actually puts a smile on my face. And I thought it was funny that I go to this church, The River, and I signed up to be the executive pastor, and a week later we're in the middle of a little capital campaign. So there you go, Chris.
That's great, Lee. I took a bunch of notes, so I'm going to ask you a few questions, and then we're going to clear the floor. You were talking about this idea of how some pastors struggle with talking about finances. Can you talk about what do you think is going on there behind the scenes? What are some of the things that cause pastors to have some challenges about why is it difficult for so many of us to talk about money and finance?
Yeah, I think that for one, people really are concerned about unbelievers in their congregation, which I think that's a legitimate concern. However, I think that there are things that you can do with visitors when you're doing a capital campaign or giving a stewardship talk, and that is to say to them, hey man, we're so glad to have you as attending here at the church. And for today, for the next half hour, we're going to be talking about how all of this came to be and how we made this happen, or with God's help, and it came through resources. And you just kind of say that we're going to talk to the folks who have been a part of this, and for you, don't feel like there's any pressure on you to participate. Yet at the same time, what we discovered was we could also invite people. When we would say, hey, but if you'd like to, you're certainly welcome. People took us up on that, and so I think that I was probably too sensitive. I would say I was hypersensitive regarding people. We used to use the term seekers, and I was a little bit too sensitive. But I would say that's a legitimate concern, and we have to be concerned about it. And there's just ways to do it with when they're there. You can do it without giving offense.
You had a great strategy that you guys used to do, and I'll bungle it, but I'll let you try to clean it up. When you were at Cedar Creek, the whole idea of trying to give money away based on attendance, you asked people to make a sort of a small contribution, right?
Yeah.
So tell us that strategy, because I was
yeah, and I thanks for bringing that up. I forgot about that. So the 1-for-1, we stole that idea from somebody. For every dollar that comes in on a particular Sunday, or every dollar for every person who attends on a given Sunday or Saturday, combination Saturday, Sunday, we would give $1 away to a local organization, or some might be a national Christian organization. For example, so on a given weekend, let's say 8,500 people attend. We call that the 1-for-1 weekend. We would take that $8,500 and we might give it to a local school, an elementary school, to do some project that they wanted to do, or we might give it to hurricane relief, or occasionally it would be internal. It might be for a family that was in great need, where there was a really powerful story to share with people. But the idea is we wanted people to know that we were giving rather than taking. And I know that there's a church in Columbus called Rock City. Chad Fisher's the pastor there. We planted that, or helped plant that church. And that church is running about 4,000 in 5 or 6 years. And they have a 1-for-1 every weekend, Chris.
That's awesome.
Yeah, they announce it. And I told him to do that when he started. He says, is there anything I should do that you wish you had done when you planted? And I said, I'd start the 1-for-1 right now and give it away every single weekend. And his people, if there's bad weather, snow or something like that, he's had people come up and say, hey, I know we had the 1-for-1 scheduled this weekend and we're going to help this family. And then these guys have written checks and made up the difference when the attendance is low. Let me tell you something else they did. It's just a thought that came to mind that might be of help. What they decided to do was the Columbus Police Department, for some reason, they were using bulletproof equipment, vests that were, I think, from World War II. I think I have the facts right on this. And so Chad found out about this somehow, some way, and their church decided to buy new bulletproof vests for the entire Columbus Police Department. And so it took them, I think they had to do it over 3 or 4 1-for-1s. 3 or 4 weeks, maybe it might have even been 8 weeks. I don't remember what the amount was, but it made the front page of the Columbus Dispatch, and his people are absolutely thrilled with 1-for-1. And at Cedar Creek, I would say it did become a permanent fixture, and people got excited about it. We were only doing it once a month. I wish we had started doing it early on, because again, it sends a signal to people. Hey, we're about giving, not taking.
Lee, was there a special way that you asked people that maybe are not yet givers to give on a 1-for-1 weekend? Did you tell people, if you're not a giver, this is a great week for you to give these the $1 so that you'll be in the mix?
Yeah, well, we didn't, we really didn't make that connection on 1-for-1. On 1-for-1, we wanted to actually stay away completely from asking them for anything.
Good.
All they had to do was attend. We did say, hey, bring your friends. And we just did a 10-for-1 at the river, where we had, we actually, because when I was talking to the pastor about doing 1-for-1, he said, well, right now there's only, just under 100 people. That's not very much money. So we decided, he said, let's make it 10-for-1. So we did a 10-for-1 and raised a couple $1,000. And then we ended up remodeling a teacher's lounge in an elementary school. That teacher's lounge, get this, that remodel of a teacher's lounge, when we got notice that we had to leave the theater the same week, we got an invite from the principal at the elementary school who said, would you guys like to use our school?
Yeah, of course. That's wonderful. That's good. Great stuff. Okay, talk about, one of the other things you talked about is this discipline for a lead pastor or the key leaders in the congregation to, not key leaders in the congregation, key staff on the team.
Yeah.
To be meeting with some of the key givers, the top 50 or 100 or so.
Yeah.
How is that? How do you? What about the person who says that's favoritism? You're showing favoritism to people in the church because they have.
Yeah.
How do you address that?
Yeah, and I've had other guys actually say that, and some of the staff have questioned that as well. And what I say to them is, well, when people are super volunteers, I put my arm around them. I thank them for their volunteering. In fact, I've done some key super volunteer lunches, breakfast, and dinners as well. But we have no, second thoughts about going to a person who's volunteering and honoring them and thanking them, and even asking them to do more. So the same with people that are giving money. When I meet with a key donor, the first thing I say to them is I say, hey, I don't know what you were thinking. You probably are thinking that I'm here to talk to you about money. I'm not going to ask you for any money. I just want to thank you for your giving. And they'll put their heads down. They'll look away. They'll say, oh, you didn't have to thank me for giving. And I would say to them, no, I want to thank you for your giving because it makes a difference. And then I might tell them about a life change story that I had just heard about. I'll say, hey, as a pastor, I get to hear all these great stories. And so I say to people who, now you back up there too, I understand the passage in James where they gave the best seats to the wealthy, or James was condemning that.
Right.
We don't give the best seats to the wealthy. In fact, what we do is we ask them for more. So I meet with them, not because, because I want to hang out with wealthy people. I meet with them because I want to ask them to give up their wealth for the ministry.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like favoritism to me. It sounds like having a conversation with them about something they can uniquely do. I want to connect to something else you said. I love this idea of obsessing about the vision. And yet I've often thought that one of the challenges that pastors have is that what they're always trying to do is get people to buy into their vision. So that's appropriate. Vision casters cast vision. You want people to catch it. One of the cool things I think is happening when you're sitting down with those 50 or 100, whatever it might be, leading givers, one of the things you're uncovering is their vision. What do they care about? What moves them? What are they so passionate about? And the beautiful thing is that when you can connect their vision to the church's vision, now you've got this incredible synergy. Instead of saying, why don't you help me accomplish my vision? You're saying, hey, I think I can help you accomplish your vision. The reason that God has given you this wealth, the reason that God has blessed you, I want to help you with that. And it's sincere. So I think there's beautiful synergy that can happen in terms of those conversations with those leading givers in the church.
I think there's also something else that happens here, Chris, to us internally as pastors when we meet with these folks. And that is that if these folks were not on your schedule, I would have missed out on so many life change stories because a lot of times we think of people with resources having it all together. And the truth is none of us have it all together. And when I hear their stories of brokenness and heartache and, kids, wayward children, and just on. And then also the stories of redemption and restoration that the church has been a part of. And it's not only helping them get the vision, and it's helped. I'm reminded when I would drive away from those, my wife would go to as many as she could, but she's not an extrovert and those things drain her. But she would go to some of the dinners with me as well. But we'd drive home and sometimes we'd have to pinch ourselves because we'd think, man, to be a part of this and see the lives changed. And so for me, it wasn't drudgery, by the way. These lunches and dinners were pure joy.
You might remember one of the questions, Lee, we encouraged you to ask some of your leading givers when you were gathering them together for this campaign that we did was something like asking those folks, what has been a spiritually significant defining moment for you during your time here at Cedar Creek? And I've giving people a chance to answer that question. And by the way, this isn't just people that God has blessed with wealth, it's anyone in your congregation. To be able to sit back and listen to people answer that question is a real privilege. Because you just get blown away by what the Lord God is doing in your church, and you're getting to be a part of that. So I can see the value of those kinds of conversations.
And for those that have multiple campuses, this is also a way to really elevate the campus pastor status when you meet with them. And then the campus pastors, occasionally, I'd have these things on a schedule and something would come up and they just handle it.
Yeah, that's really good. You said that you try to put a regular rhythm of giving series or money series or teaching from the platform about money. Talk about what was that rhythm for you at Cedar Creek, and why do you think that's an important element for a pastor to include in?
So we would do 2 a year, and when we called them, a series, they were short series. Sometimes they were only 2 weeks, but January is a great time because people are thinking about renewal, and they're thinking about budgets. And so if you do a stewardship series, without a doubt, January is a great time. December is a horrible time. January is great. And then some churches, will do their stewardship series in the summer because nobody's there. And my point is
it's a good way to make sure no one's there.
Really. And so I would say, probably January, and then in the fall, not too close to Christmas, but beyond the summer. and then 2 or 3 weeks. And depending on the series, we would also sometimes do so we're doing a series on, making your life better or something like that. 1 week of those 3 weeks might be on giving. And so at a minimum, we were doing a series of a very clear stewardship series once a year, and then one that might be tag along with another series.
That's good. And I think it's interesting too that you have to balance, don't you, teaching not just about giving, but also about stewarding.
Yeah.
Part of the reason I think we struggle in our churches is, let's say Suzanne gets up there and casts this incredibly compelling vision for why we're going to be this kind of church and blah, blah, blah. Well, because people in the church don't know what to do with their money, they can't say yes. It isn't that they don't want to say yes, they just can't. So you have to balance both, right? Both stewardship and education.
Yeah. The other thing too is I think that you have an opportunity to do 30-second sermons or 1-minute sermons on stewardship every weekend. And I'm not saying do it every weekend. I'm saying you have that opportunity every weekend. And so the offering, how you do that and what you say, you have to be strategic about that too. And different people approach it differently, but we would always think through that. And I knew what was going to be said, and there were going to be no surprises.
That's good. In fact, it's such a great setup. We're actually going to talk about that a little bit later on today. So thanks for that shameless plug. That's really good. Okay, let me open up the floor and see what other questions you want to ask. I'll just give you one.
Hi, thank you for meeting with us this morning. It was very helpful. You mentioned about talking to these donors. Is it always the pastors in your church that talk to the donors? Is it always the pastors? Help me understand that more. Who else would talk to them? Give me an example. Therein lies the situation. So in our church, we have one pastor for a congregation of about 300. And it's somewhat challenging for her to be the pastor for all of these and do the regular pastor duties, sacraments, counseling. Okay, got you. And then also be having time for what we're queuing up to be a huge vision and capital campaign program for the church. Yeah. So we have to find a way to attract and train volunteers to help us in reaching out to various aspects of our congregation. And that's a very challenging area for us. We don't have, pastor, and we don't have enough pastors. So what would your recommendation be to us? Well, okay, I'll try to answer that, and then you can give me, if I don't, you can come back again. But one of the things I think what you just elevated is the question of what's going to be on your calendar. And what I would say is this, thank God I'm not a counselor. I'm thankful I'm not a counselor, because if I was a counselor, if that was my bent, then I would counsel people. I'm a leader and a visionary, and so those things have to be fueled by resources of the vision, at least. And so what goes on my calendar first is that which will help further the vision of the church. And I'm clear about that. And resources is huge. And so it's not just resources, though, at those key donor dinners and lunches and breakfasts. It's not just about resources. It's about them being infused with the vision again and again and again as well. And so what I would say is, I don't know what meetings are more important. I mean, let me just be really clear about this. These meetings were very important to me, and my assistant knew that. And so they certainly, I did almost no counseling, and because you could fill up your calendar doing counseling, but I was rather proactive, taking this list, at the beginning of the year, at some point in the year, and laying it out for the rest of the year. And so then what's left, you've seen the illustration where you take a jar, and if you put in all these, I'm trying to think how to do it. If you put in, I forget the illustration.
Put the big rocks in first.
Yeah. There you go. So the point is, you can tell my preaching was really effective.
Bro, you got a room full of pastors here. They can all give that illustration.
Yeah. So the point is, though, that I would say, I would just ask the question, what meetings are more important? I don't know what meetings are more important. I mean, there are things that come up. Yes, when you said capital campaign, and there are weeks that are. Pastoring a church it's a difficult job, but I think one of the things pastors have to do, obviously, is
be very strategic about how they spend their time. And if they let the needs of the people, or the wants of the people dictate their schedule, they'll never do key donor lunches.
One of the things too, I think, we're talking about this important ministry of discipleship. You're always asking, who is the best person? Who is the person best positioned to disciple this woman or this man? Who is that? And in some cases, the lead pastor does in fact need to take the initiative with individuals, because that person, and it's not necessarily an ego thing, it's not a favoritism thing, but there are many people in our congregations, they only and always talk to the woman or man in charge. That's kind of how they live their life, right? They talk to that person. So we don't want to delegate that person to someone else. Now, again, there are other people in the congregation who can also be having very helpful discipleship conversations. Small group leaders, for example, with their small group, or other ministry leaders with people in their groups. But if we're talking about those that are the potentially leading givers in the church, I think there is a case to be made for why the lead pastor should have that conversation. In the same way that the music director speaks to the people that sing.
Yeah, Chris, I think it's not necessarily an either or. So you could do both, but I think the senior pastor, the lead pastor, has to be a part of it, a key part of it. I would say, if campus pastors wanted to, in fact, I used to encourage them to do that, especially with their volunteers, because we didn't want, somebody saying, well, do you care about volunteers? Well, of course we do. And then it made us think, man, if we're true, we need. And so I started doing some super volunteer lunches and dinners, but I had the campus pastors do most of those.
That's good. That's good. All right. Who else has a question? Don, here you go.
Lee, I wanted to ask you about how you held staff and key leaders and elders accountable to their own generosity, or if you had a process for that, or if you were aware of what people were giving on staff or on your elder board.
Yes, we had we said that if you are a staff member at Cedar Creek Church, you will either tithe or you'll lose your job.
Wow. That's fantastic. That's what Brent would say. Fantastic.
Well, for us, it was really simple. And that was, so we're asking people to give sacrificially, and we're not. We're robbing God ourselves. You're kidding. And, the tithe, you can argue. I understand, there's an argument to be made about, people want to say it's in the Old Testament, but not in the New Testament. I disagree with that. However, I do understand the word, we started actually kind of moving towards that. Instead of talking about tithing, we were talking about generosity. And I think that is a good way to go. However, we still felt like there was this standard of 10% that we could use with staff. We didn't do it to the folks in the congregation. If you don't tithe, you're not a member. Although we had something called missional membership at Cedar Creek. I should make note of that. And that was, to be a missional member, it meant that you were either serving and or in a life group, serving and or in a life group, and then also giving and working towards a tithe.
That's good.
Whether you're,
Who else has a question, comment? Maybe staff want to quit your job if you're a pastor. Tithe thing. Who else have anybody? Lee, this has been so good. It's always good. How we talk about at Leadership Network, the idea is we want people who can take us from what is to what could be. And I think we're all sort of sitting here with a whole bunch of thoughts and ideas that have stretched us this morning from your time with us. So thanks for taking the time. Thanks for investing in pastors. Thanks for being the volunteer executive pastor for a small church plant in Dallas. I love what that says about your heart and who you want to be in this ministry season. So I appreciate you, bud. Say hi to everybody out there for us, okay?
Yeah, we'll do that. Thank you all. Thank you. Next time you invite me, I was hoping you can move it a little earlier.
Yeah, it looks like somebody has one more question. Don, hold on.
Could you talk a little bit about your own journey toward generosity? Was that a journey for you, or were you raised with that, natural for you? Or was this a real journey for you? And if so, how much of that journey do you share with the congregation?
Yeah, this is part of, I should have brought that up. This is part of the angst that I realized as I reflect back. Chris, you asked me why I didn't like it or why some don't like it. If you may remember asking me that question. And the answer is, I used to say to the staff, I'd say, hey, we're approaching a new capital campaign. And internally, I was always conflicted because I knew I got to be a lead dog on this. I cannot be asking people to sacrifice. And Rick Warren said something that my wife and I started to practice, and that was, he said, look, if you're a pastor, here's what I would suggest you do. I challenge our advisory board and others to do this as well. I'd say, what you do is when you get an annual increase, most people get an annual increase in their job, not always, but on a yearly basis, increase your giving from 10% to 11, and you'll never miss it. The next year, increase your giving from 11 to 12. You'll never miss it. The next year, give it from 11 to 13 or 10 to 13, or, one percentage each year. So my wife and I got to the place where we were giving 20%. And actually, there were times when it was appropriate for me to say that. And I remember challenging the advisory board, who were all people who had significant dollars, available to them to give, except for one who was on the board, who was a former mayor of the city of Toledo. She didn't have a lot to give, but the rest of them, I challenged them to live like my wife and I were living. And, I would say, why don't you give 20%? And those folks, there was just no, certain people, you can look them in the eye and they like to be challenged. But back to the question of, what did we go through is, so we had a church church was 8,500 people. My wife and I were in the top 10 givers in that church, a church of 8,500 people. Now you might say, well, what was the problem? Or, was when you guys yeah. And there is a problem with that in that, in a church our size, we probably should have had more, top givers, but the community we're in, Toledo is the 8th city in America. The per capita giving there at Cedar Creek was about $22 a person versus like Texas, where I'm at now, Dallas-Fort Worth, it's about $45 a person. So we had less. But again, the point is that I had to work through that. And the person asked the question about my journey, my wife and I, and so we just had to work to where we were given 20%. We've just continued that on. For the most part, it's come down a little bit, but my pay's come down significantly as well.
Now that you're a volunteer, that getting a whole lot easier, I imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it is, Earl. It's great of you to take some time to be with us. Thanks again for
y'all.
Leadership.
Hey, by the way, Chris does a great job, and he didn't ask me to do this seriously.
Well, I actually wanted you to do a little more.
I don't know if we're allowed to do this at Leadership Network, but I'm a volunteer, so I can't get fired. But Chris, we use different capital campaign consultants, and that's probably going to come up in your talk anyways, Chris, I would think, wouldn't you? You're going to talk about that?
Yeah, I would probably talk about it.
Yeah, and so Generis, who we used for us, was the best of 3 or 4. We did our own sometimes, but they were the best. And so enough said. They're fantastic.
Thanks.
That's
Bill.
it.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks, Lee. Everybody say thank you to Lee Powell.
Thank you. Take care. Bye now.
So, yeah.